Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We are going to be getting started in just a moment, just waiting for folks to trickle into our room here. So thank you for joining us. Thank you all so much for being here today. Looks like we've got an excellent crew already getting logged in for this live webinar. Thank you so much for being here. I do have a few housekeeping announcements for us all. Just so that you know, you will be muted during this presentation. If you'd like to ask a question, please enter it into the online Q&A box. We would prefer the questions come in through the Q&A as opposed to the chat, as that helps us keep better track of it during the moderated Q&A session that will take place at the end of this presentation. We will also save time to address as many questions as we can. This presentation is being recorded and will be made available on our YouTube page. You'll receive an email tomorrow with a link to the evaluation, which will qualify you for a certificate of completion with one continuing education contact hour. And that'll also include a link to the webinar recording, which you'll be able to access as well. And again, our participants who logged in today for the full live presentation will get that evaluation link tomorrow via email. It's an automated email that comes directly from Zoom, and you have to complete that evaluation to get that certificate of completion. And then you'll be able to access and print your certificate. And with that, thank you again for being here. I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Yellen for introductions.
Thanks, Michelle. And I am going to share my screen. And if all goes well, this is our first webinar for the California Labor Laboratory. We were funded this past September by NIOSH, and we are a collaboration of UCSF, UC Berkeley, California State Department of Health, Occupational Health Branch, with some participation from UCLA and Harvard faculty. This initial series we're giving is on the impact of COVID on employment, and we're delighted that you've joined us. I want to spend a minute telling you something about the California Labor Laboratory. Our mission is to extend the pursuit of health and safety for workers in traditional employment to those in a wide range of alternative arrangements in partnerships with the affected communities. Our aims are to describe the health impacts of traditional alternative arrangements through research and to prevent or mitigate these effects through outreach, education, guidelines, intervention, and policy. We start today with our webinar series. It'll be the fourth Wednesday of every month. Next month, Patrick Carey, Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of Labor Statistics, will provide an update on the contingent worker supplement and federal data on the impact of COVID, followed in April by Professors Ellen Reese and Julian Allison from UC Riverside, who have been doing important work on warehouse work in California's Inland Empire. And then in June, we will have a seminar from Alejandra Domenzane from the Labor Occupational Health Program, part of our collaboration group here at Berkeley, on essential workers during the pandemic. There's no webinar in May, and that's because in May, we're having on May 17th to 18th, our first annual conference. The theme is precarity in employment and health. The keynote addresses are from Dr. Jacob Hacker of Yale University and Dr. John Howard of NIOSH, with sessions on the impact of irregular hours, low-wage work, burnout in employment, how work translates into poor health, and policy initiatives in California, the US government, and internationally. So with that, I will turn to an introduction in a second of Dr. Van Wachter, our speaker today. But first, you can see the connections that you can make with us either through our website, and there are plenty of ways there to connect with our seminars or to reach us or through email. So I am going to take this moment then. I'm going to stop sharing. To introduce Till. Till verifies that old cliche that if you want to get something done, you hire a busy person to do the job. Because in addition to being a professor of economics at UCLA, and we should add, since our group includes Berkeley and UCSF, a proud Berkeley alum, that he's also the faculty director from UCLA for the California Policy Lab, whose logo you see behind him. He's also the director of their Federal Statistics Program, the Research Data Center at UCLA, and if that's not enough, the Associate Dean for Research in the Social Sciences at UCLA. That's quite a lot of hats to wear. He came to all of these jobs because he's a world expert in understanding how the labor market and the institutions surrounding the labor market affect the well-being of workers and their families. This includes the analysis of unemployment data and job loss on workers' long-term earnings and health outcomes, something dear to our mission, as well as the role of unemployment insurance and disability insurance in mitigating those effects. So without further ado, we'll introduce, glad to have Till here to present our first lecture. I do want to say that it's not an accident that we have him because of his expertise, but also because the organization represented by the logo behind him represents an important effort by the university to be useful to policymakers. And we're very proud of the efforts that the California Policy Lab has initiated to do that, along with other programs like the California Health Benefits Review Program, and also, we hope, the California Labor Lab in the days and months to come. After Till has finished his talk, Professor Christina Banks, who's our Director of Outreach for the Labor Lab, and also the director of Berkeley's Interdisciplinary Center for Healthy Workplaces, will monitor and organize the Q&A. So we urge you to put your questions in Q&A, and now we turn it over to Till Van Wachter, and thank him very much for attending our first webinar.
Thank you very much, Ed, for that generous introduction. It's a great pleasure to be here. I should say, I wear another important hat, and that's that of a dad. And so partly I prepared by pushing a stroller up through the neighborhood. And so I know many of you are carving an hour of the day to be here with a lot of domestic responsibilities on the side. So I'm really thankful for you to join this webinar. And I look forward to it. And thanks also to Christina for moderating the Q&A. So just to add a little bit of background, I'm actually German and Italian, and have been in the US now for over 20 years. And I've been very fascinated by the US labor market in many ways, right? And in one way is how fluid it can be, and sometimes also how unforgiving it can be. And so I've done a lot of work to study what the effect of things like a job loss is on workers and families. And there's of course earnings effects, but there are also important health effects. And so really to underscore the important work that the California Labor Lab is doing to zooming in the role of employment on health. Right? Today, but I'm not going to talk about the effect of job loss on health, but I will point out how costly some of these job losses can be. And I've studied the long-term health effects in other work. And I think that will be very relevant in thinking about what might be happening in the labor market in the course of the pandemic. I'm gonna see if I can successfully share my screen. Can you see my slides? Excellent. So This work is possible due to a series of collaborators here at the California Policy Lab. And today I'll sort of give a very high level summary of what we've learned about the California labor market during the pandemic from a series of monthly reports we've done throughout the crisis. And just, Ed has already mentioned it, to give you a 30,000-foot view of the California Policy Lab. The idea here is that academics have something to bring to the table to help improve the lives of Californians. And the way we do that is to partner with government agencies that administer some of the state's most important programs. And we try to generate evidence, right, to improve those programs, right? And the way we do that is to form lasting partnerships with some of the key agencies in California, and mostly from UC system researchers, right? And what we do is mostly quantitative research on some of the administrative data that is collected when governments actually run programs to assist individuals. And it'll see some very specific example of what I mean. And we have 5 research areas, of course, labor and employment. That's what I'll talk about today. But we also do work on homelessness, on poverty, education, and criminal justice. And increasingly, we have a 6th research area that also involves health. And those 5 research areas are picked on purpose, right? Because they partly span an important, the social policy space in California. Now, today, I'll talk about work that came out of our labor and employment unit, right? And as many of you know, right, that the pandemic just had an immense impact on the California labor market. And what's very important to know that the state is constantly collecting data as it runs several programs that can be used to understand what the experience of Californians was during the pandemic and how it has impacted different groups of workers and how it has impacted different communities. Right? And as I mentioned, CPL has published a series of reports, right? Our unemployment insurance reports during the pandemic, right? And today I'll do my best within 45 minutes or so to highlight, some of the core findings, right? As you can imagine, there's a lot more going on in these reports since we've been doing them for, now close to 2 years. But here you'll get sort of some of the key highlights. And I should say, it's very typical of how the California Policy Lab operates. We seek to establish long-run cooperations with our partners. And so here our partner is the Labor Market Information Division of the California Employment Development Department. And they are not responsible for any of the results I present here or any of my opinions, of course, but we have worked together for a long time to, so we can get access to the data, but also we inform them and see how we can help and assist them using this data. And that way we as academics can bring something to the table. But our understanding is, of course, the partners which we work with in government have a lot of experience on their own data, on the questions that they're trying to solve, on the programs they're running. And so this cooperation is really integral to what we do. Now here's just a broad overview of the data we're using today. And I'm going to try as much as I can to present a series of interesting facts without sort of overloading you with definitions or statistics. But it's just helpful to keep in mind what we're working with here. So the biggest program that assists workers who lose their job and become unemployed, as many of you know, is the Unemployment Insurance Program, short UI, right? And as with many other government programs, as benefits are paid, right, information is collected on the individuals who receive benefits, right? So if somebody becomes unemployed and files a claim, there's a record. If somebody receives a payment, there's a record, and so on. And to understand whether individuals are eligible, right, the state has to collect information on earnings and employment. And the good news here is that we can really see individuals who are employed, among those who are employees, right? We can see their earnings every quarter, and then we see when they applied for UI, whether they get it, right? And then how long they are unemployed receiving benefits, and what happens afterwards. So we can really look over the life cycle of sort of an unemployment spell at what happens. And this longitudinal perspectives, right, this ability to follow workers over time is really crucial to what we do. It is also not easy to do, right? And that's where, you know, some of the value added comes in that we can bring by having a lot of experience working with these very, very difficult data. One key advantage, other than being able to follow workers over time, right, is that as individuals file unemployment insurance benefits, the state collects some basic demographic information, right? And that puts us in a very good position to understand which groups of workers might have been most affected, which benefited from the programs, which didn't, and which workers are really recovering, you know, as we're getting out of the pandemic. You'll learn a lot about the data. I just want to point out a few shortcomings that are important, right? An important shortcoming is that, especially on race and ethnicity statistics, it'll be hard for us to find a benchmark in public data because these ethnicity and race questions are not always asked in the same way. The other shortcoming is that we observe earnings only with a lag. So, you know, today you'll learn about, you know, reemployment patterns, right, as we are coming out of the crisis, right? But I can't unfortunately tell you about who is reemployed today, right? And we can talk about that later on, and I'll be very clear, right? But just make clear that these administrative data are really helpful because they have a lot of high quality information for a lot of individuals, right? But they don't cover everyone. We don't have the self-employed in our data, for example, right? And they have some shortcomings. And, you know, I'll try to address those and see how, if we can overcome them. With that said, right, if you're about to jump up to, you know, do something very important, that here are sort of the three big questions and takeaways that I'll be working through. The first one is, what was the impact of the pandemic on California's workforce? Just taking stock, right? And what we found is that throughout the crisis, 1 in 3 California workers filed for UI benefits, right? And that you file for UI benefits typically when you're laid off. So that's over a third of the California workforce, right, has experienced layoff and unemployment during the crisis. And so that's a staggering number, right? And the important piece is, among those, right, a substantial share had very long non-employment spells. And as I'll discuss, just the fact that we have such a large group of workers that were sort of shocked by the pandemic is likely to lead some persistence as we're coming out of the pandemic. The second key question I'll be discussing is, you know, who was served by the unemployment insurance program? And there's sort of two stories here. First of all, there's some good news. California did great in covering the workers. A lot of the unemployed, if not most of the unemployed in California, ended up receiving some benefits, as far as we can tell. But there's important inequities that remain, and our data allows us to pinpoint, you know, what could be done and which directions we should look at if we wanted to further improve the UI program. And finally, I'll talk about reemployment patterns. And I'll be looking at, you know, where are people 1 year after the start of the crisis? And the key question is, of course, right, how has the world changed, right? Are we now in a new environment? Will it take us years to dig us out as we're sort of reallocating everyone? Or, you know, are we coming back to something that's quite similar to before the crisis? And the answer here is, there was some restructuring, of course, right? But a large share and an increased share of workers are returning to their previous jobs, are returning to their previous employers, right? And that's good news. Unfortunately, you know, at least 1 year in, right? And I think that's still partly true today. Some workers were left behind, and those were mostly the lower educated workers, who's, you know, some of the big industries hiring lower educated and less advantaged workers were and are still affected by the pandemic. And that's just important to keep in mind. And the big bottom line, you know, other than these very important, you know, lessons, is that the state's data on labor and employment can just provide very useful insights on what happened to workers and local communities and labor markets. We can't answer all questions. They're very important questions we cannot answer. And I'd be very glad to talk about that and how we're thinking about that, right? But, as a benchmark, there's just a treasure trove of data here. And I hope you'll be, you'll enjoy some of the statistics I'll be putting up. So with that as a broad introduction, let me just go into the first topic. And I'm just kind of looking at my watch to not, take my professorial 1.5 or 2 hours to explain it all in detail. So let me briefly talk about the overall impact of the pandemic on California workers. And I'll try to be brief. And I apologize that I won't have as much time to sort of delve into each of these statistics. You'll have access to the slides if you're interested. You can reach out to me. There's also much more detail in the report. But one thing we did just to get a sense of what happened is we looked at from March 2020, when the pandemic first started, to mid-October 2021, right? So late of last year, we looked at what's the fraction of the California labor force that filed for a regular unemployment insurance claim, right? And that's just to point out, there was an important new program, the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, that mostly covered those who are self-employed. I won't be talking about that today. I'll talk mostly about regular unemployment benefits that in California are actually available to a wide group of individuals that were employees. And PUA is important. It's just, it warrants a different talk. So if you just look at individuals who filed for unemployment insurance benefits, 33%, so 1 in 3 of all California workers that were working in February 2020 before the crisis filed for UI benefits. And that is just a staggering number. Typically, not all job losers file for UI, right? And those who end up on UI are those who are the hardest hit, right? So being on unemployment, especially for some time, right, is a marker for things being difficult. This crisis was different, of course. There was a large expansion on unemployment insurance. And partly this increase, this large amount of claiming reflects, the success of the system. But certainly it's worth keeping in mind that a large share of the California workforce now has had experience with unemployment. And, it's sad to say, right, the impact was strongest for some of the least advantaged workers. About 1 in 2 workers with a high school degree filed for UI, right? A large share of women filed for UI. And as a tendency, younger workers were more likely to file for unemployment insurance benefits. If you zoom further in, right, if you want to really construct the worst case scenario, those who spend more time on unemployment insurance, or simply more time unemployed, but generally have the hardest time to reintegrate themselves in the labor market. And what we could do, since we could track workers over time, we could see, what's the share of workers who spend more than half a year receiving benefits? And we picked half a year because that's sort of the federal benchmark to calling somebody long-term unemployed, right? Of course, the benchmark is more or less reasonable depending on the economy, but that's what it is, right? And what you see that among those who already receive unemployment benefits, about half spent over half a year on the program, right? Now that's a really large number. If you're interested in what's the share of the labor force who spent half a year on UI, well, that's 20%. 1 in 5 workers had this very long spell of receiving unemployment benefits. Again, right, this was a special moment in time, right? We tried to put the economy on hold, right? This may not necessarily be, as bad of a marker of long-term outcomes as it usually is, but it's certainly the amount of individuals having spent time away from their job is very large, and it should make us pause, right? As we are expecting, right, that the economy immediately bounce back. And again, right, it's less educated female workers, Black workers tend to have very high rates of long-term unemployment. One thing we did to overcome the fact that we don't have that much of context of individuals and their families is to go down to the county level. And we looked at what's the share of the unemployed receiving benefits for over 6 months at the county level and correlated that, right, associated that with the county characteristics. And you can read that two ways. First of all, you learn something about the differences across California communities. You see here the map, and those shaded maps, that the darker shade, the more long-term unemployed there were during the crisis. But you can, right, in addition, you learn something about, some of the risk factors for experiencing these longer spells, right? And you can see that those communities with a high population density, right, generally poor, right, those with a high share of Black workers, Black residents, excuse me, right, a high share of individuals that speak limited English, right, those, that use more public transit. These are areas, right, that are more likely to spend, where individuals are more likely to spend long stretches of time in unemployment. And so that foreshadows some of the other results to say that, there were important inequities the way the crisis played out, right? In some ways, the UI system was able to help these workers. In some way, it wasn't, right? But it's important to bear in mind that, at least during this period, inequality that was already pretty large is likely to have risen further. On the other hand, there are some clear pointers here where we could think through, how these workers might be assisted. And I'll come back to that when I talk about access to UI. So I want to get to some of the other salient results, but just to give you the very high level key takeaways of this first section is that we saw a staggering amount of job loss and long-term unemployment that we could really pin down because we could fault track the same workers over a long period of time. And we saw that these job losses and long-term unemployment was more pronounced for more vulnerable workers and communities, right? And for those of you who use a lot of federal statistics, it's typically very hard to get data such as long-term unemployment within a state, right? Just because the samples in these surveys aren't large enough. Here we could really zoom into the counties, which is really helpful. And just for a moment, it's like, why did that matter? Is that, well, we know that if there's a lot of unemployed, right, that the economy generally needs to go through some process in which workers find job against, right? There's a lot of dynamics, and the higher the unemployment rate, the slower it tends to recover, right? And we also know that these longer unemployment spells, or these job losses that lead workers to move onto UI, typically can be very damaging for workers over the long term. People switch careers, they try to retrain, some get discouraged, right? And again, this pandemic was probably different. We'll see later, a lot of people bounce back, return to their old job. But the numbers here are so large that it makes me pause and would say, I wouldn't be surprised if it just takes some time, even once the economy picks up, right, for unemployment, to fully recover and employment to fully recover. And we can come back to talk about that later, but I just wanted to point out the implication of these large impacts. Let's switch gears just a little bit and talk about equity in the UI system. This is a huge topic at the moment for the US Department of Labor for very good reasons. California is, in many ways, a very successful state, right? But we have taken a look and put California into context and then thought about California itself. So I'm going to be presenting a few statistics from a report we did for the US Department of Labor that looked at our typical measure of who receives unemployment insurance benefits, which is called the recipiency rate. Right? This is the share of unemployed workers that receives unemployment benefits. Right? It's very clear that not everybody who is unemployed necessarily receives unemployment insurance benefits. It's also, just to open the hood for a moment, it's not necessarily clear who we should be looking at. Should we be looking at those who call themselves unemployed? Should we look at workers that are not employed? There are some important statistical and definition questions here that I'm skipping over. I'm going to be looking at the group of workers who say they're unemployed and want a job, who say they're discouraged, and those who also work part-time even though they want more hours. So that's, for those of you who like statistics, that's the so-called U6 measure of unemployment by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. That's a pretty broad benchmark, but really fitting for the crisis, where, and we can discuss why. Now, the takeaway here is, look at the figure. Before the crisis, the share of the unemployed receiving benefits hovered around 20%. So the unemployment insurance system does not cover a lot of the unemployed, and that's well known, right? During the crisis, this increased considerably, right? And that's shown in the blue line, and it did so, though, differently across states. And California is an outlier here in the sense that they had the 4th highest recipiency rate during the crisis. So it's here on the far left at close to 100%, meaning 100% of this very broad group of unemployed workers seem to have received benefits. But there's a substantial amount of variation across states, and I'll show you partly what that's driven by. And yeah, let me get you there. There's some interesting findings. But first, let's talk a little bit more about California, right? California had, before the crisis, sort of also just a 20% recipiency rate that put it in, on the 9th in the statewide classification, so still one of the top states. And what you see here, right, you see the dispersion at every month in the recipiency rate across counties, and the big blob, of course, is Los Angeles. And what you see as the pandemic hit, a sharp shooting up of benefits, and then in the course of the summer of 2020, benefit rates really hit close to 100%. And then they kept being relatively high, slowly going down. And then you see a sudden collapse here at the far right. This is when extended unemployment benefits were cut off, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second, right? But the message of this figure is, with the help of federal extended unemployment programs, California did a great job at ramping up coverage during the pandemic. As soon as these programs were cut off, we're back to where we were. And right, there's considerable variation across counties. So if you look up and down in any given month, right, top counties look much better than bottom counties. And our data allowed us to take a look why that is. So here's probably something for you to go back at if you're really interested in this topic. But what we try to do, we try to understand across states, how can there be such big differences? And 2 things stand out, right? The first one is that states that have a higher share of Black non-Hispanic population, right, tend to have lower recipiency rates, right? And states that have that are poorer tend to have lower recipiency rates. On the other hand, the choices states make about how to structure their unemployment insurance program also makes an important difference, right? So there's some demographic factors, right? And then there are some policy factors that matter. And it's likely no accident, right, that some of those states who have a higher share of Black workers may have less generous unemployment program. This is something that we didn't look at, but is of course a big concern at the federal level. What we were curious about, it's like, okay, California seems to be a state that, with its policy choices, right, has put itself in the class of states that serves a lot of workers, right? Right. What is left in California, right? In California, we see a much less of a dispersion in who gets benefits, right? And that confirms that these policy choices make a difference at the unemployment level, insurance level, right? But there's still some disparate access across states, right? And again, those counties that have a higher share of Black non-Hispanic residents, right, have recipiency rates, meaning a lower share of the unemployed receives benefits. Same for counties with with a high share of Hispanic population. And then there are some interesting factors such as, share of broadband access or limited English proficiency that, of course, point directly at possible ways that we could improve the UI program if we put our minds to it. So I want to leave some space for questions. There's more information here on which programs really mattered during the pandemic, right? And there were extended benefits and extended duration and increased amounts. And both of these programs really benefited less advantaged workers. But the key takeaway from this second section is that, largely in terms of the amount of coverage, right? The California UI system was sort of a success story during this crisis, right? But we saw still, right, even with our more generous benefit parameters, vulnerable workers not getting benefits. And the reports we have sort of point to specific things that one can think about doing. And, it's very typical after a recession that unemployment insurance moves off the policy agenda. I think that's partly happening at the federal level, right? But so now would be a great moment to think about improving the UI system. I've talked about sort of the overall impact of the pandemic. I've talked about who gets access to unemployment insurance benefits. Let me talk about reemployment patterns. What can we learn from the state's data about how folks who received unemployment benefits are doing after the crisis? And what we did here is to take everybody, that the large group of people who filed and received unemployment benefits essentially in March, in the spring, right, in winter spring of 2020, right, in that first big wave, and look, a year later, where were they, right? And that's what I mentioned earlier. We just last week were able to look beyond, the spring of 2021, right? So there's an important lag, especially in the data on earnings, but the key is to get a flavor where we are in the recovery and have some important lessons. And we're in the process of updating these. So as of, June, May, June last year, where were we? Well, about 57% of those who lost their job a year before, right, were reemployed, right? That's lower than would have been the case before the pandemic, right? So we were still, the labor market still had not recovered, right? That's perhaps not such a surprise. But what's really interesting here to see what difference were there across, individuals and across industries. Right? And again, this is a slide that has a lot of detail for the folks that are interested to dive a bit deeper. I'm just going to give you the very high takeaways. The reemployment rates, were sort of, here you can see on the right, there's a scatter plot where we compare the reemployment rates before the crisis and during the crisis. And as a tendency, right, everybody has lower reemployment rates, right? But some group tended to do worse, right? So Black workers, younger workers, lower educated workers, right? And men were less likely to be reemployed. And actually, I just misspoke. This on the right here, that to the left there where you see the bar graphs, you see, that light blue graph tells you the actual reemployment rate by groups, right? And you see, for example, that the older workers are less likely to be employed. The workers with just a high school degree are less likely to be employed. Right? If you have gotten a job, on the other hand, you are much more likely to return to your previous employer, right? So there's a silver lining here in the sense that for those who get a job again, right, they are with a high likelihood to be back to where they were before, right? And that's what's shown on the right, where we compare the share of the reemployed returning to their previous employer, right? And you can see that that's all above that gray line that shows you how it would be if things were exactly equal. So people are more likely to come back to their employer. And as we'll see later, they're also more likely to stay in their industry relative to before the crisis. I want to spend just a little bit to talk about one group that in particular wasn't doing so well compared to before the pandemic. And those are the workers that just had a high school degree or less, right? And, you know, after you lose your job, you always take some time to find employment again. So these are lines that show you from the first to the fourth quarter after a job loss and receipt of unemployment insurance, what's the fraction of individuals finding a job again? And the blue line is what happens after the pandemic, right? Everybody takes some time to come before the pandemic. So the yellow line is what happened before the pandemic. Everybody takes some time to find a job, right? The blue line is what happened during the pandemic, where the share of individuals finding a job a year after separation is lower, but the gap between the two lines, the yellow line and the blue line, right, is substantially high for those with a high school degree or less, right? And so we have spent some time in our report zooming in on that group. And one thing that comes out is that they are likely to not have as many opportunity as before the crisis, partly because some of the sectors that hire these lower wage workers are still affected, right? And here's what we find, right? You can look at the reemployment rates by industry for the less educated workers that receive unemployment insurance benefits. And you can compare the pre-pandemic with the pandemic, right? And the blue line, which here captures the pandemic, is always less, meaning that reemployment rates of low educated workers were lower everywhere, no matter what sector they came from. But there's some large sectors that tend to stand out. In particular, right, those at the lower bottom, the accommodation and food service and administrative support and waste management service. Those are two very large sectors that hire low-wage workers, and they have lower reemployment rates than before the crisis. And these are, of course, restaurants, right, and low-wage job to support offices, right? And insofar as telecommuting is still high and people are not going to the restaurants, right, those are going to be two big sectors that hire lower wage workers, right, that are not as actively hiring or were not as actively hiring in July, and, you know, have been slower to recover since then. And that's just important to keep in mind, that low wage workers have, you know, and especially low educated workers have taken a longer time to recover, partly because the jobs that they would typically get are not coming back. So that's also borne out when we looked at, you know, well, if people are not finding jobs in their previous sector, right, where are they moving to, right? And there was a big question in the course of the crisis whether the economy might now look different, right? And there would be a lot of reallocation, which would mean it could take a long time to recover. And the answer is, well, about 70% of people just return to their prior industry, right? So it's the very large share of individuals just comes back to where they used to work before, right? But if they switch job, the destinations have changed, right? And again, a few sectors stand out. There's many fewer people moving to admin support and waste management services. Again, these are often low wage jobs supporting offices, right, that might be affected by telecommuting, right? And you know, another one that has, you know, fewer switches to is construction, which is a very popular sector, right? The other thing to notice that typically is a popular, you know, higher wage sector for low wage workers. Another thing to notice is that retail trade, healthcare, and social assistance are sectors that have been receiving quite a few workers, right? But of course, these are sectors that were affected by the pandemic. The issue is that especially low-wage workers, keep switching in the same type of jobs, right, and now have less opportunities, and hence they're less likely to recover. And the last thing is sort of on maybe a silver lining, right? A lot of folks see that transportation and warehousing is up, or has received more workers, right? There's likely, you know, related to an increase of online commerce, right? But clearly, where those jobs are coming up, right, is not where, you know, often most of the unemployed, lower educated workers are. So I want to get ready to wrap up to leave time for questions. Here's some of the key takeaways on the reemployment and industry transition, right? And what we see is, right, is that there's at least a year into the crisis, especially lower educated workers had not bounced back as much as they used to, right? And that's partly because some of the key sectors hiring them are still depressed and are still slow in recovering, right? Because those are the sectors still directly affected by, changes in demand and employment due to the pandemic, right? But we did not see a vast amount of large-scale relocation, right? So in the sense that there's some shifts in employment, such as a rise in warehousing or some decline in admin support, right? But the question is, how permanent these are and whether they're still related just to the pandemic that's fading, right? And so I don't think we have to be worried that suddenly the economy has to adjusting to a complete new normal. And so to come back to a point I made earlier, we typically see some degree of restructuring of the economy as we go out of recessions, right? And any adjustments that workers have to make because they were unemployed, right, take some time, right? And it often can take quite a while. So I would be cautious to expecting a quick recovery. There are many good reasons, right, why the recovery, is progressing, right? But why it'll take some time to reach sort of where we were before the crisis. With that, I'm ready to wrap up. I'm going to come back to some of the main themes, right? So what we try to do, we measured the disparate impact of the crisis and had advantage of using state data on employment and unemployment to really zoom in, right, across communities, across demographic groups to understand where the biggest impacts were, right? And show that less advantaged workers in counties typically had a bigger impact of the pandemic. We also looked at who got access to unemployment benefits, saw that there was a high share of workers, right? But again, the less advantaged were more likely to be excluded, even within California, which is generally a state that provides good access to UI. And then last, we assessed the recovery 1 year in, right? And saw that there's also disparate impacts or on the likelihood of coming back into employment and switching industries and being recalled, right? And there's some good news here in the sense that a lot of people are going back to the prior job. A lot of people are going back to the prior industries, even among, the less advantaged workers. But on average, especially lower educated workers have lower reemployment rates, and less advantaged workers are less likely to be recalled, more likely to switch industries, right? So it'll take up some time for the California labor market to recover, right? And it's really important to watch how these inequalities among workers develops as we're going through the recovery. And last but not least, right, this data that really allows us to track workers over a long period of time, and where we see a lot of workers within the state, really allowed us to pinpoint more closely where some of the key issues and results were as we come out of the pandemic. And with this, I'm going to pass it to Christina for the Q&A. Thanks for listening.
Sure. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was extremely interesting, and many of the people listening in have some pretty deep questions here. Let's start with a few basic ones. One person asked if you could explain recipiency rate, how it's calculated, just so we're clear about what the data are reflecting there.
Yes, thanks, Christina, and thanks for the question. It's an important concept, and it's has been used over the last 30 or so years at the state or federal level to measure, in a way, that the coverage of the unemployment insurance program. And it's typically measured by taking a number of people who are unemployed and take that as a benchmark and think, okay, let's look at the number of people receiving benefits, right? And you take the ratio of the two, which gives you what's the fraction of the unemployed who receive benefits. Great. At a very simple level, which is different. I mean, and anyway, there are certain important nuances here, especially as who you count as unemployed, for example, that we could discuss. But that's the benchmark, and so the natural place to start to think about, how generous the system was, and that's partly why we went deeper into figuring out, well, now we can see, using the California data, who really got covered, and we'll keep working on maybe looking at a group of workers that were laid off, and at a cohort, among a cohort of people, we can see from the time of layoff who gets benefits, but which is a slightly different question.
Yeah, no, that's good. A couple of other people asked about undocumented workers and how they fit into your data set. How do they receive unemployment benefits? Are they in your data set at all?
So undocumented workers per se wouldn't be in our data set, right? And that's, you know, an important omission, especially for California. What we have done, right, we have tried to think through whether the share of undocumented in a county, right, is correlated with, for example, the share of unemployed receiving benefits, right? And that's definitely true, right? So if there's a county with a high share of undocumented, right, some of those will likely be counted as unemployed in major surveys, but they can't receive benefits. And so that's an important margin in California to watch for, and that was part of our February 2021 report, and also our report to the Department of Labor. That's a very good question.
So another question had to do with the breakdown of your data, and that is, the question was if you could break down your data to a fixed, 5 or 6 digit level of ICS. Is that possible? If you did talk about some industry aspects, but can you break it down further into the 5 and 6 digit level?
It's a very good question, right? You saw here, for those who know the data, the 2-digit North American Industry Classification System, the NAICS, or NAICS, hard to say, right? And it has several additional digits, and we can look at more specific digits. We pay a lot of attention to whether we have large enough groups of individuals in a particular cell, right? So at some point we got to be careful, right? We couldn't, look at, older white men, take a group that was unemployed in a very specific sector, because there'd just be too few of them, right? But say at the state level, we have looked at some finer industry categories.
So here are some more questions that sort of jump from the data set that you're presenting and what you think about, for example, why there are staffing shortages. So one question is, let's see. So in spite of extended UI benefits being exhausted, why do you think so many businesses are having trouble with staffing? Do you think that perhaps the UI recipients were able to use their benefit funds to leverage themselves into higher paid positions?
That's a very, very interesting question. It's commonly believed, or in the popular discourse, is that if you pay unemployment insurance benefits, that prevents some workers to find a job. And there's a little bit of truth to that, right? But the effects are never quite large, right? So I and others didn't expect there to be sort of a sudden flood of employees when you turn up extended benefits. And instead, what happened that a bunch of unemployed are still unemployed and without benefits, right? So it's a real cost to workers, but not surprisingly, not a real boost to employment, right? It's possible that, some of these supplements, or to take a step back, unemployment benefits are really, really low. I had the slides, but for sake of time, I took it out, right? Typically, you'd get $300 a week. And if you were in a restaurant, you're more on the average would be like $250, $270 a week. So it was clear that individuals couldn't spend a lot of time on these benefits. And so there were these benefit supplements for $600 per week and $300 per week. And they were designed to get people, and we have that in our report, just above some of the standard, very low income lines in California. So it's not that suddenly people were moved from sort of poverty into the middle class, right? California is a very expensive state, and $600 got you, above low income, and $300, just above very low income. I'd have to look it up myself, but they made a difference, right? But it wasn't huge. So it's maybe possible that some workers, saved a large chunk of that and now have a little bit of time to do something else. And there are people who have access to different data than we do that are researching that. But I would be skeptical that that sort of explains a large amount of labor shortage. I would more think that in part, the sectors that individuals find jobs are still depressed, right? And in part, individuals still have childcare issues, right? Hard to find babysitters for a 4-month-old, I can tell you that, right? And even more so for many women trying to return to work because they carry most of the burden, as well as there are still health concerns related to COVID, right? So probably it's a variety of factors where maybe the ability to spend that extra income, is one of the factors, but I wouldn't think that it's decisive.
And one last question before we say goodbye to you. Will these findings be used to inform California's policy efforts to better connect workers still on the margins, such as Black workers, older women, high school education only, et cetera? If so, what efforts are underway?
So that is a really good question. And of course, that's why I'm here, in the sense that I spend a lot of my time together with my team to work on this data, to really make this information available to those who might be able to improve the system. And I know they're listening. We are ourselves not involved in turning the wheels of what is a very complicated machine, right? But we keep producing that information, and we're hoping that we're getting out of crisis mode, right? So that we can sort of start actually turning some of the wheels that can be easily turned, right? So, for example, we know there's an important digital divide among lower income individuals, right? If you actually look up the stats, it's quite staggering for being in 2022, and that would be something that could be fixed. The same thing with language barriers and so on. And I think I hope that those who have the ability to do that are listening, and we're doing our best to keep providing those stats.
Great. And I think that's it for our questions. I would like to remind everyone that our next webinar is on March 23rd, where Patrick Carey from the Bureau of Land Labor Statistics will be our presenter. And we really thank you for taking the time today, Dr. Van Wachter, because it's so important that we understand what the state of California employment situation is, and how many of us on this call can help to improve the reemployment and the improvement in the wages and work situations that many of our laborers have today. So let me turn it back to Dr. Yellen.
Well, I can only second Christina's thanks to Till, and to express appreciation for all of you who tuned in. This is the first of our series on COVID and employment, and we hope that you come back next month, and we hope you come back for our conference on precarity and employment and health on May 17th and 18th. And with that, we'll call it a day. And again, thank you very much, Till.
Thank you very much for having me and for all these very interesting questions.
Great.